Welcome to the Into Novus Knowledge Agronomy Podcast, your go-to resource for agronomic insights, technology solutions, and ongoing education. At Into, we combine agronomic expertise from soil analysis to best practice application methodologies to provide a holistic view for your yield optimization. Our focus is on practical strategies that improve efficiency and drive better results in the field. Join us for interesting discussions, expert advice, and the latest advancements shaping modern agriculture. Whether you're in the field, on the road, or at your facility, we're here to keep you informed ahead of the curve. Welcome to the Into podcast. Today, joined with my counterpart Derek in Northwest Missouri and Rodney in Illinois. How are you guys doing?
Great, thanks.
Doing good.
So today we just kind of want to go through, we've been kind of looking ahead with fall fertility and looking ahead with fall herbicide applications the last two episodes. Today, maybe want to take it back to just a real end time, talking about harvest, kind of where we're at to date, maybe some of the issues that we're seeing, kind of explain some of that. So I thought, guys, we'd start off first with just kind of a harvest update. So where you're at in your geography, kind of what you're hearing yield-wise, problem-wise, et cetera. We could start with you, Derek, if you want to.
Yeah, I'd say relatively speaking, harvest is still getting off to a fairly slower start. I say that I don't think there's anybody behind yet, but yesterday I was across my whole territory from north to south, and I saw a couple combines running, but I talked to several growers who, had just started getting into some fields, or maybe not at all yet. There's still plenty of guys that haven't started going, and honestly, in the heart of my territory, I don't even know if I've seen beans cut at this point. Again, I don't think, I wouldn't say we're behind by any means. It's just been a little bit slower start, but I'd be pretty hard pressed to believe almost every grower out there now has corn that's going to be dry enough to harvest at this point. And I would caution guys how quickly beans can turn to. And I know I'm going to have guys in my territory next week be cutting beans. So it'll change quick, but we just don't have a whole lot of progress yet. I'm getting rain across my territory this morning, which is a good thing. But that'll also slow down harvest for the most part here, at least for the next couple of days, probably.
Thanks, Derek. How about you, Rodney?
Yeah, so we're in a little different situation. We're, I would say, full swing, and it's not a good thing. The reason I'm saying it's not a good thing is there's like a Mason-Dixon line of disease and stock quality, just everything changed so stinking fast. So here we are on the 23rd of September, and we've got corn down, 110, 112-day corn at coming out of the field at 18, 19% or less. And the stock quality is extremely bad and extremely variable. So a lot of corn getting out, not many beans cut. But the beans that have been cut are super dry, like single digits, 8%, 9%. I know we're going to address that a little bit later here on how much yield you're giving up by doing that. But some of these beans went from, hey, they're green, and today they're, oh shoot, they're 8%. So we're in a different situation than I think you guys are to the south, and we're so stinking dry. We only had 300s last night where Derek's saying it's raining. We just can't buy rain. We've had some showers but nothing to add up substantial to help us out. So we are probably, I would say, on a norm, we're two weeks ahead of normal on our harvest.
I'd say, well, I appreciate that, Rodney. I'd say we're a little more closer to Rodney. I mean, it's full bore down this way, and some guys have been running for even a couple weeks now. Some just got going within the last week, but pretty much everyone's done something to this point or darn close to it anyways. We did have a lot of variability in terms of planting dates, so that's kind of dragged things on a little bit. To Rodney's point, corn yields for us have been all over the board. I'd still say on the vast majority, we're above normal. We're good yields. Maybe not great like last year, but there's some places that are really close to last year's, and there's some places that are quite a bit off. But really, management showing up big time heard at field averages anywhere from 150 on the low side to 300 on the high side. So we're all over the board in between that. Soybeans, we've had some cut, a lot of the April planted beans that have been cut so far, and there's a lot still sitting that haven't been cut yet. But field averages anywhere I've heard from 45 to 90, just depending on where they're at. So a lot of variability there. I think the early planted ones are probably going to be the best again, just with August being as dry as it was. Some places reporting the second driest August on record, or maybe the driest, and one of the driest months ever recorded. That's not going to bode well for later planted soybeans. Although we've started to get a little rain here and there in the last couple of days, and that may help out the double crop beans. But a lot of the May planted ones, the ship's already sailed on. So it'll be interesting. And to Rodney's point, the beans are coming out that have been cut super dry, like 8%, like he's saying. And even some of the earlier planted corn, some of that, there's a fair amount of that's still in a decent moisture window. But I've even heard some of those loads on that not sprayed with fungicide running 13% already, just some early planted, early maturity stuff. So it's just funny how every year at this time, moisture seems to zap away so fast, so quick. But guys, I just was going to ask you a little bit too, as far as, I don't really, it's too early to pick up any trends per se, but just anything you want to add as far as you're seeing any yield differences by management, maybe anything early you want to mention. Maybe start with you, Rodney.
Yeah, so yeah, we are picking up, and we've harped earlier on our other podcast about soil tests, and where I'm going with that is farm. I'll classify farms A, B, and C. Our A farms that are managed, the fertility's there, paying attention to all the details. That corn's still doing good for the year. But as we get into our class Bs and Cs and the soil tests aren't up to par and we didn't manage things quite as well, they're taking a hit, and it's showing in the just the overall quality of the stock of the plant and the grain quality. And so we haven't had a test weight issue yet, but on some of the less managed acres, the test weight isn't what it normally is. And on the class A soils that got a good soil test behind them, they've been well managed. We're holding in there on test weight. So yes, there's a lot of variability. I guess that's the big word, variability within any farm. There's just not a consistent across the whole farm, and I call it the Martian spots. You look at farms, that they've opened up, and you're like, wait a minute, one end of that farm is still green, the other is deader than dead, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. So it's the Martian spots of what happened and why. So I would say the word right now for us is very extreme variability.
That's good, Rodney. Derek, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with a lot of the things that Rodney said. The high management fields, like I alluded to a minute ago, we still got a lot of acres to be harvested yet, but of the yields I'm hearing on the corn side of things, I'm hearing average to maybe a little below average on those lower, uh, whether it be low management, lower fertility, maybe no fungicide type fields. I mean, we're clear up until harvest seeing as much of a dramatic difference between our fungicide field versus not, with the amount of southern rust we had and things like that. I mean, we're certainly going to see a difference in harvestability and things like that as we get later into the season. Now, I will say, as far as I've seen so far, even harvestability and stock quality is still hanging in there on even some of the low management fields. But one windstorm and the later we get, I think that's going to start being an issue in some corn that wasn't managed quite as intensively. And so I would suggest to growers some of those lower management fields to make sure you're evaluating those. And is it a situation where we need to get this corn out right now before it gets any worse or harder to harvest type thing? But Rodney said his term was variability. I would agree with that. We're going to have some good corn yields on the higher management stuff and with the bean yields too. Like you said, I expect our earlier planting beans and things like that to yield as well. I just think it's going to be more across the board. It's going to be spotty. I don't think it's going to be widespread. And it's going to be a case by case based on fertility and late season disease and soybeans in my territory. Weeds are certainly going to be a yield limiting factor in my area as well. But all those things will go into really how that yield comes out, of course. So maybe an obvious statement, but I felt like last year was a little more widespread than probably what we're going to see this year in terms of our yields.
Yeah, good points, Derek. I just reemphasize what you guys already mentioned. I will also say, a year like this, lots of water early on. Just what's the difference between in-season nitrogen, et cetera? And the early trend seems to be, it all depends on your nitrogen management program, whether you fall applied gas, your spring applied, how much you put on, are you close? Are you figuring a pretty low amount of nitrogen per bushel or a higher amount, et cetera? But the general trend seems to be that in-season definitely more of a return maybe than last year. And then the fungicide piece of it, Derek alluded to it, but we're see some already hearing some big numbers, but it just depends on how much disease pressure you had, et cetera. But there are, sounds like, going to be some pretty substantial yield differences. Rodney, you started to hit on the test weight piece, and I do want to bring it back to that because that has been a question from some folks. Some of the early test weight numbers that were coming in were relatively low. Since then, I've heard of, to your point, some differences based on managers, geography, planting date, et cetera. But the general trend early on was our test weight is lower. Folks were asking why. I guess I'd just ask you that question, Rodney. Why this year? Why are we seeing the lower test weight? What's your thoughts?
Well, so Derek hit on it. Late disease came in, and so I'm going to speak for up here in Illinois, in the geography I'm in, is we had a good crop growing, and then the heat came. Um, Ahead of pollination, we had a string of heat, and then when we went into pollination, it was okay. And then when we hit grain fill, once we got it pollinated and we switched to grain fill, then we heated the temperatures up again, and we forced that crop to put starch in those kernels fast. And anytime you do that, you take the chance of reaching black layer early. And when you do that, then you a lot of times have a lighter kernel. And so when I look at taking a lot of different samples, whole plant samples, depth on some of these hybrids is not very deep. The kernel is not big. And so a smaller kernel cannot just pack as much starch in there to get weight. And so we're dealing with some of that on our, what I would call the earlier maturities. It appears the later maturities might be okay. But for us, 56 pounds is still what we call light test weight. We're used to well-managed farms being that 58 to 62 pound test weight. So 56, 55, 56 to us is a light test weight. I haven't heard many under that 55, but it's still lighter. And I'm hearing some guys having to be careful of not blowing some of it out the back of the combine because of being lighter. So I think it's once again Mother Nature and weather forced us to pack starch in those kernels so stinking fast we couldn't get it enough packed in the kernels for a heavy test weight.
Rodney, those are all good points. I think our geography, some other things too, contributing. He's spot on with the temperature and pushing along growth stage, late season things like a lot of southern rust pressure we had. I think nitrogen efficiency is also another one that could have played into it. We had some of that, especially if you fall applied in and didn't correct things in season. That could have been a contributing factor. I also think to your point about the heat and then the dry August, we had quite a bit of premature ear dropping or ear drooping, you might call it, where the shank fell over. And I think anytime you limit nutrient flow to those kernels, you're also going to impact things like test weight. So yeah, great points, Rodney. Just wanted to kind of hit on that. That's kind of been a top question for some guys. Why am I seeing lower test weight than I normally do? And those could be some of the reasons. Now, with that said, to your point, some of the loads I've been hearing coming in lately have not been that bad. So it may have just been something we saw early on. With that said, kind of talking about test weights in corn and then rolling that over to soybean harvest. Derek, you and I were talking yesterday a little bit about timely soybean harvest. I mean, maybe what are some of those reminders you want to tell guys that have some beans out there standing in the field?
Yeah, I guess we kind of already, I think one of us mentioned it a little bit earlier, how quickly beans are going to change. And, one day they're 13 and the next you're down to 8. And regardless of how quickly that changes, just remember that yield hit that you're going to take from 13 to 8% moisture is about 5.4% right off the top of yield just by harvesting between 13 versus 8% moisture. So keep that in mind. Now, I understand every grower only has so much equipment, time, and only so many fields he can harvest all at once. And to harvest every soybean acre on a farm at perfect moisture probably isn't going to happen. But what I've been encouraging my soybean growers, and one of my higher yielding growers I was talking to yesterday, I told him to prioritize that field, and where we've been doing that additional extra management where we expect to get some of our highest yield. I mean, last year, I think harvest moisture in beans was one of our biggest killers in yield, just because it was kind of a late soybean harvest for a lot of guys. I remember riding in combines last year. There was one where the yield monitor rarely dropped below 90 bushel, and it was 8%. And so you're sitting there kicking yourself, because if we're hitting 80, 90 bushel beans at 8% moisture, man, we could have added just another 5% if we could have gotten in there a little bit earlier. The other thing I'll remind you with beans is don't necessarily be testing those. Don't go off the looks of them, because you can have some that still got leaves hanging on and things like that, and those beans are drying up and ready to go. So like I said, prioritize those fields when it comes to beans, because they will change quick. Now, I'd also caution guys, yes, soybeans can pick up some moisture from rains and things like that, but it's pretty short-lived, and I typically wouldn't bank on, if we get a later soybean harvest, well, I'm going to wait a little bit longer to try to catch a rain. I personally probably wouldn't bank a whole lot on that, because by the end of it, most guys end up missing that window anyways, and they just continue to dry it out even more. But so yeah, prioritize the fields, and just understand how much that moisture can mean in terms of yield type thing. So
yeah, all good points, Derek. I think you're hitting at the 5.4% that comes in water loss, but it also, to your point, doesn't account for the shattering, et cetera, the loss of the head that can happen when you're harvesting 8% soybeans. So that number could be a lot bigger than 5%, depending on how things go. The conundrum with all this, obviously, is the fact that you have soybeans ready, corn, and so it becomes a challenge. And every operation is different. Every priority is different. So it's hard to say which is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. But with that point, as far as harvesting soybeans early, Rodney alluded to stalk integrity issues with corn, especially stuff that wasn't sprayed with the fungicide. I mean, that also needs to be a priority. So you can't obviously harvest it all at one time, but you are going to have to prioritize what's the most important. And yeah, some of this corn that didn't get sprayed with the fungicide seems to be getting pretty weak, pretty fast. And even stuff with the fungicide, there's been some pretty intense stalk rot pressure out there just from the stress of the year. So can't do it all at once, but just pick your priorities, as Derek said, and try to run with that, the ones that's the most important. With that said, guys, I think we've filled up enough time for today, but I appreciate you guys joining us today. Appreciate you listening. We look forward to talking to you next time.
Thank you for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by Into Novus Knowledge. Please reach out to your Into agronomist if we can help in any way. Join us next time for more in-depth agronomic advice.